Out east lives an iconic bird species, the blue jay. It's a fan favorite, but out west, we have a jay of our own. In this video, we talk about the Steller's jay, the amazing bird that it is, and some fun facts on why this bird is so amazing. Let's dive in. So as always, let's get into the identification of this species. Of course, it's a jay, and therefore, most of the bird is a deep, dark blue. But its upper back and its whole head is black. It sports a very large, pointed crest that can sometimes be pushed down, but most of the time when it's feeling aggressive, or at least when humans are around, that crest is going to be sticking straight up. It has a black bill, black legs, and black feet. The bird is about the same size as a blue jay and a little bit bigger than the American robin. It's from the family Corvidae, so it is a corvid like all jays and ravens and crows. These are very intelligent birds. Its scientific name is Cyanokita, and let's break that down real quick. What does that mean, of course? Well, cyano comes from the Greek word kowanos, which means dark blue, and kita comes from the Greek word jay. So, dark blue jay. And then its species name is Stelleri. Now, Stellers, obviously, that's where that comes from. Who is Steller? Well, George Steller lived from 1709 to 1746, and he was a German naturalist that made a few expeditions to the Americas. In July of 1741, George Steller actually hung out just off of the coast of Alaska at this little small island. And he was very impressed by the blue birds with a crest hanging out on that island. This is where he obviously found the black-crested jay species, and his notes that he made on the bird during this time period eventually found their way back all the way to Petersburg. And this is where a man named J.F. Mellon ended up using those notes to finally come up with a name. And the name that they came up with it was Steller's crow in 1788. Now we also know that there is a bird renaming initiative taking place in the United States over the next couple of years, so Steller's jay will eventually transition to a new name. If you have any ideas of what you want that name to be, put it down in the comments below. I love seeing these fun, creative ideas that you guys come up with. Now, this bird has a conservation status of least concern, and that typically means that the bird's overall population is doing pretty well. But these days, least concern doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't be concerned. For example, there's been a 34% decline of this bird's population from 1966 to 2019. So yeah, compared to a lot of bird species, this bird is of less concern, but really we should be concerned about pretty much all living things on the planet at the moment. The oldest Steller's jay to ever live, or to at least ever be recorded by humans, is 16 years, and this was a specimen found in Juneau, Alaska. And a lot of times how they do this is they'll band the bird, and then when that bird eventually returns, they'll be able to band it again, and that ends up giving you kind of like a date range. So they banded it once, 16 years ago, comes back, they find the same band on that living bird and say, oh, this bird's 16 years old. And in some cases, that's kind of like the minimum age that the bird is, but these birds don't really live much longer than that, most likely, as we haven't found any specimens above that date. Now, Steller's jays actually have a ton of subspecies. There's 16 or 17 subspecies depending on who you ask. Now, there's two obvious differences that I want to go over. There's the coastal subspecies, and there's even a subspecies called the coastal Steller's jay. And then there's the interior subspecies, and of course, there's a whole bunch of subspecies that fall into these two categories, but they all kind of share the same similarities, so I'm just going to branch them off and just describe those differences. So the coastal scrub jay has a very, very dark head, and it has really no markings around like its eyebrow or really on its face. It's almost a completely dark jay up top, and they're just darker overall birds as well. The interior subspecies typically have like a very white and light eyebrow above its eye and a lot more white markings on its face. Now, what's also cool is this jay does occasionally hybridize with other species. So for example, it has been found to hybridize with the blue jay, and that hybridization looks really, really cool as well. It also rarely hybridizes with the Woodhouse's scrub jay here in more the interior west and the California scrub jay that hangs out along the coast. Like I mentioned before, this is a strictly western bird species. It rarely heads out past Colorado, but we'll go over its full range. Its range starts in southern Alaska and it makes its way all the way down to Mexico and near the bottom of Mexico as well, but it really does hug western North America. And like I mentioned, it doesn't really go past Colorado. There's hardly any records of it going past that spot. The blue jay, however, has been exploring much further west from the eastern United States. And I mean, we get them annually every single year here in northern Utah, at least one or two of them. So that's where that hybridization is starting to take place, but their paths do rarely cross. Another thing to mention is that it rarely goes into the desert. It will when there's an abundance of food available and it's able to kind of head out deeper into some of these other areas, but it doesn't love the desert landscape. So most likely you're not going to find them in desert lowland type habitats like Nevada, for example. They do like high elevations, so that's where they would be found in Nevada, and they just like higher elevations in general. So that brings me into its habitat. It prefers coniferous forests or mixed coniferous deciduous forests, and like I mentioned, they do like those higher elevations. So here in the state of Utah, Steller's jays can really only be found up canyons and up into the higher elevations in the mountains. But during the winter, they will drop down for those areas to find food. They are a bird that you can find in your backyard, but don't really expect to see one super far away from those higher elevation areas. They kind of like those foothill backyards that have an abundance of food, but we'll talk about how to potentially attract them if you fall into that category. Like I mentioned before, these birds are extremely intelligent and social birds. They have a whole bunch of crest displays. The main crest display, though, is when its crest is sticking straight up, which is typically how we see them as humans. That's a sign of aggression or potentially stress, although like I mentioned before, if any human is in that vicinity and they see them, their crest is almost always going to be stuck straight up. And then their crest will be pushed down when they're foraging for food, preening, and then also during courtship. Because they're a corvid, they also mob predator birds, and they kind of do this in a coordinated attack. So if you ever hear a whole bunch of Steller's jays screaming in the woods, most likely there's a hawk or an owl species hanging out there that they're trying to get rid of. Now, these birds are really successful. I mentioned that they're a status of least concern, and that typically means that they're a generalist species. They can eat pretty much anything, to be honest. They eat insects, berries, seeds, nuts, small animals, eggs, and even nestlings as well. They'll also go after garbage and camp food, which has got them the nickname of camp robber. There's a whole bunch of other jay species that also have that nickname, including the Canada jay. But a Steller's jay and things like the Clark's nutcracker, those are also considered camp robbers because they'll go get your food if you leave it out. Something really cool about the Steller's jay in their diet is they'll actually carry a whole bunch of these larger seeds like acorns and stuff in their throat and in their mouths, and they'll go bury those in the woods. And they have an incredible memory to know exactly where they've been caching their food because they'll do it kind of all over. They're not going to put all their eggs in one basket, and they'll go find that throughout the winter and have plenty of food to survive. And then another thing, they're often considered to be a bully species by us humans from our very anthropocentric positioning. So we see them and we say, oh, they're bullies because they'll steal food from other birds. And we'll get to this in a little bit in the nesting section, but they'll also kick birds out of their nests and just take over their nests. So some people don't like them for that because they're a little bit more aggressive, but again, they've evolved to be successful in nature, and that's just what they do. So that brings us to breeding and nesting. These birds are considered to be monogamous. There's not hardly any data on them breaking out of that monogamous relationship. They're also very territorial over the female that they've selected, and the pairs will typically remain together throughout the year, something known as pair bonding. Nesting typically starts in late March, but as you've seen in this series about birds, the further north you go, the later the same species will nest. So it might be late March for Southern California, but all the way up here in Utah, further north, they might wait till April or May to begin nesting. They'll have one brood per season, and if that brood does fail, sometimes they will try to re-nest again. It'll typically nest near the trunk of a tree on horizontal branches, but sometimes they're also known to nest nearer to the ground or in shrubs, depending on what's available to them. And it's not out of the question that they'll try nesting in man-made structures such as buildings or barns. Both sexes will participate in the nest building, but the female typically does most of the work. Their nests are made out of plant fibers, moss, sticks, mud, leaves, animal hair, and roots. So they're very resourceful birds. Their eggs are bluish, greenish, very dim coloration, almost looks white, and it has a whole bunch of brown speckles or purplish speckles all over the egg. Each clutch will have 2 to 6 eggs, but they typically lay on average 4 to 5 at a time. They incubate for 16 days, and this is mostly done by the female, and the male will go out and bring food back to the female, so they have those two distinguished roles. When the eggs hatch, the chicks are altricial, which means that they're pretty much hopeless. They're completely naked and they can't really fend for themselves. And then both sexes will participate in feeding the nestlings. They spend 16 days minimum in the nest, and then the parents will feed the young for a month after fledging. When the nestlings start to try to fly, it's about 15 days after they're in the nest, 16 days like I mentioned. They'll start trying to hop on the surrounding branches. 27 days after that, they start to exercise their wings, and then by day 30, they're doing sustained flight. The Steller's jay's main predators are accipiter hawks, specifically the Cooper's hawk. Cooper's hawks, in some regions of the United States, prey on these birds quite frequently, which is probably a reason why Steller's jays mob predators so much, because they recognize them as a threat. And then also American goshawks. They're at higher elevations, so the American goshawk is also up there to be able to prey on these Steller's jays. And like I mentioned, these birds fight back. They really are bully birds to all the smaller birds, but then they also don't really tolerate having predators in their territories. Steller's jays have really kind of easy to recognize calls. The only bird that's kind of similar that I get confused with is the Clark's nutcracker, which we'll do another episode on that bird a little bit down the line, but it's really kind of a harsh, loud, ugly, terrifying call. Let's take a listen right here. They also have a lot of lesser used vocalizations as well that we're not going to get into in this video. There's just so many sounds that corvids can make because I think of that intelligence and social ability that these birds have in their brain. So it would take all day to talk about these, but it's not out of the question to hear a Steller's jay make really odd noises while you're observing them. Just some tips for birders if you want to find this bird. Go up to high elevations. You know, you don't have to go all the way up to a peak by any means, but just heading into a canyon, heading up the mountain a little bit, and taking a hiking trail will really help you be able to find these higher elevation bird species. Again, they like coniferous forests, so really you kind of just have to hit that coniferous tree line and you should have Steller's jays in that area. Of course, if you live in the western, side of North America. Another thing you can do is you can listen for the call and then follow the sound. Again, these birds are not quiet. You can hear them from half a mile to a mile away, and you could really track them that way and find them. Another thing you can do is you can go to campgrounds. Again, these birds love human food, and that's why they're called camp robbers. So if you go to these campgrounds, you have a higher chance of finding these birds there than just wandering the woods. And lastly, they're attracted to feeders. They'll eat peanuts or other large seeds, including black oil sunflower seeds. So if you have a feeder in your yard and you're near a mountain slope, you'll probably get Steller's jays in your yard. But also, a little hack for you if you're out west, a lot of ski resorts have bird feeders, and things like Clark's nutcrackers and Steller's jays will flock to these feeders, and they're almost a guarantee if you're in the west. So head up to your ski resorts during the winter and you should get really good views of these beautiful birds. Here's a few fun facts about the Steller's jay, and I guess fun used very loosely for this first one. They'll actually kill small birds to steal their nests, like I mentioned, and therefore also are considered bullies. They're really good mimics. They can mimic other birds, squirrels, pets, and some human mechanical sounds as well. A lot of corvids can do this, but Steller's jays are particularly good at this skill. And then just a recent study that I found while doing research on this in the PNW, or the Pacific Northwest of the United States, they're finding that due to global warming, Steller's jays have started to move higher in elevation. So they're kind of considered like a mid-elevation bird, and some of them live even lower than that, but they're starting to move up higher and higher as the earth is starting to get warmer and warmer. And so they're coming into more conflict with Canada jays, according to this study. So the question is, these Steller's jays moving in, does this have anything to do with the Canada jays' decline recently in numbers? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's very interesting to think about and keep an eye on. Let me know in the comments below, do you have any special experiences with the Steller's jay? I personally like it better than the blue jay, but maybe I'm a little bit biased. As always, make sure you check out Bright-Eyed Birding, where I take you on weekly adventures to find these birds in the wild. If you'd like to support the channel as well, check out my calendar for 2026. There's only a couple weeks left in the year. It features some of my best photos of the year, including this great horned owl in the month of October. So check that out if you want yourself a nice calendar. They have QR codes that'll take you to the video where this bird was featured during one of my adventures. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Bright-Eyed Birding Learn.